There is an ancient question that refuses to die. Long before psychology, before the microscope, before the telescope, humans looked inward and asked, what moves me? What survives when I am gone? Some called it spirit, others soul. But even now, in an age where the universe is mapped in subatomic precision, the question remains like an ember that won't extinguish. Do we have souls? Or are we only bodies dreaming of eternity? Carl Jung once wrote, "We are so captivated by our subjective consciousness that we forget ourselves as the most subjective of all phenomena." What he meant was subtle but devastating. Modern people are haunted by the loss of mystery. We have dissected everything, the heart, the brain, even love, and yet we cannot locate the one thing that makes all this alive. And so the word soul has fallen into disrepute. To the scientist it sounds sentimental, to the theologian it sounds vague. But Jung never gave it up, he redefined it. For him, soul was not a metaphysical ghost floating above the body, nor an immortal essence in the religious sense. It was the bridge, the invisible interior that links consciousness to something infinitely larger than the self. Jung once told a student, "You can call it psyche, you can call it soul, it doesn't matter. What matters is that it acts." And that is where we begin, not with belief, but with experience. Everyone, whether scientist or mystic, lives moments that seem to break the thin wall between inner and outer reality. A dream that predicts a coincidence too sharp to be random. An intuition that saves your life. These experiences whisper, maybe the universe is not indifferent. Maybe consciousness is more than chemical smoke rising from gray matter. When Jung wrote memories, dreams, reflections, he confessed that the question of the soul was no longer theological. For him it was psychological, experiential, and utterly real. He said, "I can only say that I know it exists, for I have experienced it." To him, the soul was not an object of belief, but a fact of experience, as real as gravity, but working inwardly instead of outwardly. And yet, this conviction did not lead Jung back into religion. It led him toward the borderland, where psychology meets physics, where dreams touch quantum uncertainty, where myth and experiment begin to sound alike. He wrote to the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, "The psyche and matter are contained in one and the same world, and they may be two different aspects of one and the same thing." That thing, that unnamed unity, was what Jung called UNUS MUNDUS, the one world. Perhaps he thought what we call soul is not trapped inside us, but participates in that wider order. And if so, then the question, do we have souls, becomes inverted. Maybe it is not we who have souls, but the soul that has us. Maybe life is the soul's experiment in time, and we, our bodies, our thoughts, our small dramas, are instruments through which it learns to see itself. In this series, we'll follow that question through three doors: Jung's psychology, modern physics, and the uncanny world of near-death experiences. Three lenses, one mystery. If the soul exists, it may not be a religious relic at all, but a hidden dimension of reality itself. So, before we chase the soul across the boundaries of science and psyche, we begin with Jung's redefinition of the word itself. What is the soul for a psychologist who refused to become a theologian, yet refused to be merely a biologist? That is where we go next. When Carl Jung spoke of the soul, he was not speaking as a priest or philosopher, but as a man haunted by the depths of his own mind. He grew up in a Protestant household, shadowed by theology. His father was a pastor, yet, as Jung later confessed, my father's faith had lost its root. As a child, Jung watched religion decay into words, while the numinous, the living pulse of mystery, moved elsewhere, into dreams, into symbols, into the unseen. It was there that Jung found the soul again, not in heaven, but in the psyche. He wrote, The psyche is the world's greatest wonder. We know nothing of it, and yet everything depends upon it. For Jung, psychology was not a science of symptoms, it was a map of the unseen interior. The soul, or anima, was one of its central realities. But he warned, we must not imagine the soul as a fixed entity, but as a living process, a being in becoming. This is the key. Jung replaced the soul as substance with the soul as relation. It is the bridge between the ego and the unconscious, the inner figure that speaks in dreams, art, intuition, and love. He often described it as the mediatrix, the feminine principle of inwardness that draws the ego toward depth. In men, it appears as the anima. In women, its counterpart, the animus. These are not mere gendered archetypes, but functions of relationship between consciousness and the deep unknown. Jung once said, the soul is that which connects the inner and the outer man. It is the one who experiences meaning. To live without it, he warned, is to live only in surfaces, what he called identification with the persona, the social mask that replaces the living individual with a role. He observed that modern humanity had largely lost contact with this mediating center. We have forgotten the soul, he lamented, because we are always outside ourselves. We identify with what we do, not with what we are becoming. But the soul, for Jung, is precisely that movement of becoming, the slow unfolding of meaning through conflict, failure, and revelation. He gave this process a name, individuation, the lifelong dialogue between ego and self, in which the soul plays the translator. The self, in Jung's sense, is not the ego expanded, but the totality of what we are, conscious and unconscious alike. The soul is the emissary of that totality, the whisper from the deep, reminding us that we are more than our waking awareness. To Jung, this was not poetry, it was empiricism of another order. He studied hundreds of dreams, symbols, and myths from patients and cultures across the world, and he found the same patterns repeating: images of descent, death, rebirth, of divine marriage, and the guiding feminine. The soul, he concluded, is a world in miniature, a cosmos within, and yet, he remained careful. Whether the soul is immortal or not, he wrote, I do not know, but I know that it behaves as if it were. This was the pivot of his entire psychology. The reality of experience is not dependent on proof, but on effect. If a dream changes a life, if a symbol heals a psyche, then the soul acts as real, regardless of metaphysical certainty. In his letters, Jung sometimes confessed that he preferred not to believe in the soul, but to experience it. He said, I do not need to believe in God. I have experienced him. For Jung, belief was always weaker than encounter. The soul is encountered, not theorized. It appears in the trembling before beauty, in the awe of nature, in the breakdown that cracks open something infinite. By redefining the soul this way, Jung rescued it from dogma without stripping it of depth. He gave it a new home, not in heaven, but in the hidden symmetry between mind and matter. That symmetry is where our next step leads. Because Jung's insight did not stop at psychology. His correspondence with the physicist Wolfgang Pauli opened a new door, a bridge between psyche and physics, between inner experience and outer reality. If the soul is not merely subjective, could it also be part of the fabric of the cosmos itself? When Jung began corresponding with the physicist Wolfgang Pauli in the 1930 seconds, it was more than an exchange between two curious men. It was a collision of worlds. Jung represented the deep interior, dreams, symbols, psychic patterns. Pauli represented the objective order of quantum physics, equations, probabilities, the logic of subatomic behavior. Yet both men, in their own ways, had reached the same threshold, the limits of measurement. Pauli had witnessed matter dissolve under the microscope of modern physics. Solid objects became waves of probability, particles appearing only when observed. He once admitted to Jung, half in jest and half in despair, physics has become a sort of psychical mystery. Jung replied with sympathy, "The psyche is the greatest of all cosmic miracles. You will never find its equal in the realm of matter." From this dialogue, an idea emerged that neither science nor psychology could contain alone, that psyche and matter are two faces of one underlying reality. Jung called it the psychoid realm, a level of being that is neither purely mental nor physical, but both. Pauli, seeking his own unifying principle in physics, called it the UNUS MUNDUS, the one world. The two men proposed, cautiously, that the mind and the world might be woven from the same fabric, one experienced inwardly as meaning, the other outwardly as energy. This was not mysticism in disguise. It was an observation born from the failure of classical categories. As Pauli wrote, the concept of the observer cannot be omitted from physics. In other words, consciousness participates in reality. Jung took this further. He speculated that what we call soul might be the human experience of this participatory field. He wrote, "Psyche and matter are contained in one and the same world and are in continuous contact. The soul, then, is not the thing in the head, it is a relation between consciousness and cosmos." He illustrated this through his famous notion of synchronicity, events connected not by cause but by meaning. A patient dreams of a golden scarab. The next day, during their session, a real scarab beetle taps against the window. To the rationalist, it is coincidence. To Jung, it is an instance of the psychoid order, the world responding to the pattern of the psyche. It is as if, he said, the soul had extended outward into matter itself. Pauli recognized the same symmetry from another angle. In quantum experiments, the observer's act of measurement affects the outcome. The world, at its most fundamental level, does not exist independently of participation. Pauli suspected that this mysterious interplay between observation and physical state was, in some deep sense, mirrored by the psyche's relationship to the outer world. Thus, the idea of the soul began to stretch no longer the private possession of a human being, but a principle of relationship woven into the universe itself. The soul, in this light, is not inside us. Rather, we exist inside it as eddies within a larger field of consciousness. Jung once told a seminar, "Our psyche is part of the world, and its structure is that of the world." It was an astonishing claim that the same laws governing the cosmos might govern the inner life. Dreams, symbols, synchronicities, these were the psyche's way of participating in the same mystery that physics glimpsed through its equations. And so, the language of science and the language of soul began to converge. What Jung intuited through the unconscious physics was discovering through mathematics, that at the root of reality, subject and object intertwine. The observer is no longer separate from the observed. Consciousness and cosmos reflect each other like twin mirrors in an infinite regress. If this is true, then the old opposition between soul and matter collapses. The soul becomes not a metaphysical relic, but the subjective face of the same energy that physics describes objectively. And in this unity, the ancient intuition of the soul finds new scientific form. But this idea raises a new question, one that science cannot easily answer. If consciousness is woven into the fabric of reality, can it also exist independently of the body? When the brain shuts down, does the field of awareness collapse, or does it shift its mode of expression? To approach this, we must look beyond theory to experience, to those who have for a moment crossed the threshold and returned. If Jung's idea of the soul as a bridge between psyche and matter sounds abstract, The stories of those who have crossed the border of death bring it down to human scale. These experiences are not found in laboratories, but in hospital rooms, mountain accidents, cardiac wards, in those strange moments when life flickers and something watches from outside. The modern world calls them near-death experiences, NDEs. But long before that, shamans spoke of soul flight, the Egyptians mapped the past journey, and Plato described the soldier returning from the afterlife with visions of cosmic order. Jung would have said that such stories are archetypal, recurring patterns through which the collective unconscious reveals its hidden structure. Today, medicine documents them with clinical precision. A patient's heart stops, the EEG flatlines. For minutes, there is no measurable brain activity. And yet, when the body is revived, the person recounts something extraordinary rising out of the body, watching doctors at work, passing through darkness into light, reviewing their entire life in a moment, meeting beings of intelligence and love. Neuroscience struggles to fit this within the boundaries of the cortex. Hallucination, say some, oxygen deprivation. But that answer often withers under detail. There are cases recorded by physicians like Dr. Sam Parnia and Pim van Lommel where patients accurately described events occurring while their brains were clinically inactive. Surgical instruments, conversations, even visual details from outside the room. I saw from above. One patient said, but I was not eyes. For Jung, this question, what perceives when the brain no longer does, was not a puzzle of science, but a mystery of psyche. During his own near-death experience in 1944, after a heart attack, he wrote of floating high above the earth, seeing our planet as a radiant blue sphere. I saw the entire globe bathed in a magnificent blue light, he later recalled. And I knew, this is the world in which men live. He felt profound peace and the pull of an immense presence, as though he had reached a cosmic home. And yet at the threshold, a figure appeared, his doctor, now mythic, standing as a guardian of the living. Jung was told he must return. It was a cruel disappointment, he wrote. Everything I had loved was there, and yet I was to go back into the body. When he awoke in his hospital bed, the vision had vanished, but its effect did not. He said afterward, it was an initiation. I have been in the other world and I know it exists. Still, he refused to claim that what he saw was proof of immortality. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he writes, whether the psyche is immortal, I do not know, but that it cannot be simply extinguished seems to me more probable. What he meant was subtle, that consciousness, being rooted in a field deeper than biology, might transform rather than end. The psyche, he said, behaves as if it were independent of time and space, perhaps because part of it is. This echoes through the testimonies of those who return from clinical death. Many describe a profound shift in values, a loss of fear, a spontaneous empathy, an intuitive sense that life continues beyond boundaries. These psychological effects fascinated Jung. He would have seen them not as mere aftermath, but as signs that the experience touches the deepest layer of the unconscious, what he called the self, the archetype of wholeness. When people say, I was not thinking, I was being, Jung would have nodded. That for him was the voice of the self, the transpersonal center that organizes our psychic totality. In the NDE, the ego dissolves into that larger awareness, much as the wave merges back into the ocean. The light seen by so many is not an external lamp, it is the symbolic image of psychic totality, of consciousness freed from its narrow focus. Yet Jung's realism never abandoned the question of symbol versus substance. He would warn, one should not confuse the image of a thing with the thing itself. Whether the light is a literal realm or a symbolic vision, its meaning is the same. Life is not a closed system. Consciousness points beyond itself. This tension between symbol and ontology, psychology and physics remains unresolved, but it opens a door. If consciousness can exist in altered form when the brain ceases to function, perhaps it is part of a larger continuum, a field of awareness that includes but transcends the physical organism. And if the psyche is indeed continuous with that field, as Jung and Pauli suspected, then the soul is not simply in us, but we are within it, temporarily localized patterns in a vast sea of mind. Death, in that view, is not annihilation, but transformation, the wave returning to its source. To explore this continuity, Jung turned to the very frontier that once defined physics itself. The search for unity, for a world where psyche and matter are one. And in that search, something unexpected emerged, the intuition that both science and soul might speak the same language, if only we learned to listen differently. That convergence, the moment when physics and psyche finally meet, is where our journey leads next. When Jung's heart failed in February of 1944, he entered what he later called the most decisive experience of his life. For weeks afterward, he lingered between worlds, half in the hospital bed, half in another dimension that seemed more real than anything on earth. His body lay in Zurich, his awareness soared among the stars. I found myself high above the earth, he wrote in memories, dreams, reflections, bathed in blue light, and below me the globe shone with an ineffable radiance. He saw the continents and oceans, yet they no longer belonged to geography. They were alive, spiritual, breathing in the vastness of space. Time dissolved. He felt no weight, no name, no past, only a knowing without thought. Jung described approaching a massive stone temple, suspended in the blackness. Its gates opened toward infinity. Inside, he sensed that all the answers of existence waited what he called the origin and the goal of all life. And yet, as he drew near, a presence blocked his path. His doctor, appearing in transfigured form, radiant and commanding. The doctor communicated without words. Jung must return. His earthly work was not finished. I felt indescribable sorrow, Jung wrote. Everything that I had loved and valued was there, yet I was to go back. He realized that to re-enter the body was to re-enter limitation, struggle, shadow. But the choice was not his to make. The vision dissolved, and he awoke in the hospital, confined once again to flesh and gravity. For months he hovered between fever and lucidity, caught in a strange twilight. He later said that ordinary life seemed unreal by comparison. Everything up there, he wrote, appeared as timeless and full of meaning. Everything down here was fragmentary. The return to earthly reality was a descent from cosmic clarity to human ambiguity. Yet it was precisely this descent that completed his understanding of the psyche. Before the experience, Jung's theories of the unconscious had been largely symbolic. Afterward, they became existential. He no longer spoke of the psyche as metaphor, but as a continuum of being. He began to suspect that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but merely filtered through it like light passing through stained glass. The psyche, he wrote, is not in the body is in the psyche. That single reversal transformed everything. The soul, once imagined as a ghostly passenger within the body, became instead the ocean in which the body floats. Death, then, is not an end but a re-immersion. Jung wrote, "Death is the goal of life, and life is the process of dying." He did not mean this morbidly. He meant that life is the soul's apprenticeship in form, a way of learning to carry consciousness through the transformations of existence. He often told his students that what he experienced was not fantasy but numinous reality, something that breaks through from the background of eternity. Yet he refused to turn it into dogma. Whether these experiences prove survival after death, I do not know, he said, but they prove that our psychic reality reaches far beyond what we understand as life. Jung's vision became a kind of secret core around which his later work orbited. The UNUS Mundus, the Archetypes, Synchronicity, all found new depth in that moment when he glimpsed the cosmos as a living field of mind. His earlier partnership with Pauli now seemed prophetic. Psyche and matter truly mirrored each other, and he had seen the mirror itself. In a late seminar, reflecting on that event, Jung said quietly, "When you have experienced that reality, you no longer fear death. You understand that life continues, but not as you." He meant that what we call I is only a temporary crystallization of the greater self. The individual dissolves, but consciousness, as participation in the universal psyche, endures. And yet, Jung never forgot the paradox. The soul longs to return, but it is bound to incarnate, to live, to suffer, to grow. The meaning of existence, he wrote, is that the self becomes conscious. The near-death vision was not an escape from life, but its illumination. So when Jung finally recovered, he felt as though he had come back not to the same world, but to its shadow. He gardened, he wrote, he dreamed, but everything he did afterward was in quiet conversation with that luminous sphere beyond the stars. His experience stands as a hinge between psychology and mystery, a testimony that the soul, whatever it is, transcends our categories of life and death. It is both here and beyond, both the dreamer and the dream. And this leads us naturally to the next horizon, where Jung's insight begins to merge with the newest frontier of science, the place where his vision of unity, the UNUS MUNDUS, starts to echo in modern physics and philosophy. Because if the psyche can exist beyond the body, and if physics now speaks of information fields and consciousness woven into reality itself, perhaps the two are not separate languages after all. Perhaps, as Jung foresaw, they are two dialects of the same eternal truth. Jung once wrote, "Every science is a function of the psyche, and all knowledge is rooted in it." The psyche is the greatest of all cosmic wonders. What he meant becomes clearer the more we listen to the frontier of modern physics, a world where, strangely enough, reality begins to sound psychological. In the 20th century, physics shattered the illusion of a mechanical universe. At the subatomic level, matter ceased to be solid. It became patterns of probability, vibrations in a field of potential. The old separation between observer and observed dissolved. The act of measurement changed the outcome. Pauli, Jung's friend and intellectual counterpart, called it the observer problem. It was as if the cosmos refused to reveal itself without participation, as if consciousness were woven into the act of existence itself. Jung recognized this resonance. He had already been describing a psychic field that worked by meaning rather than causality, synchronicity. The idea that mind and matter could align through significance, not through physical force, was his intuitive way of describing what physics was discovering mathematically. That the universe is not a cold machine, but a dynamic network of relationships. He wrote, "The world hangs together by invisible threads of meaning." Today, as quantum theory evolves and cosmology deepens, the echoes of Jung's vision are growing louder. The physicist David Bohm, a student of Einstein, proposed that beneath the apparent fragmentation of the universe lies an implicate order, a seamless whole from which all things unfold like patterns in a hologram. Bohm said that mind and matter are not separate substances, but different aspects of one unbroken movement. Jung would have nodded. He had said the same of the psychoid realm decades earlier. Meanwhile, information theory and consciousness studies suggest that reality may be fundamentally informational, not material. Energy and data, form and awareness mirror each other. To some, this sounds abstract, but to Jung, it would have sounded familiar. The soul, he believed, is the archetype of order. It is how meaning organizes experience. If matter is information, and information expresses order, then the soul is the subjective experience of that order, the inward face of the same principle. Jung's collaborator Pauli hinted at this unity in their letters. The laws of physics are not enough to explain the world. They must be complemented by the laws of the psyche. What Pauli glimpsed and what Jung affirmed was that psyche and physics are not two different domains, but two languages describing one continuum. One looks from the outside in, the other from the inside out. To illustrate this, Jung often used the image of the circle, the mandala, as the symbol of wholeness. In physics, symmetry is the same principle. The universe maintains balance through mirrored relationships. When symmetry breaks, particles differentiate. When consciousness divides, the ego emerges. Creation, both physical and psychological, begins with differentiation from unity. The soul, Jung might say, is that movement toward reunion, an instinct toward wholeness that echoes the universe's own drive to balance. Contemporary thinkers like Bernardo Kastrup and Donald Hoffman have revived this intuition in scientific language. Kastrup's analytic idealism proposes that the universe itself is a field of consciousness, and what we call matter is simply consciousness interacting with itself through stable patterns. Hoffman, from cognitive science, argues that reality as we perceive it is a user interface symbols generated by consciousness to navigate a deeper reality. In their ways, both men approach Jung's old insight. Psyche and cosmos are reflections in the same mirror. From this vantage, the question, do we have souls, becomes not a metaphysical speculation, but a description of our place in the fabric of existence. The soul is not something one owns. It is the perspective through which the universe becomes self-aware. Each human life is a local concentration of the cosmic mind, a temporary pattern in the vast field of consciousness. The death of the individual is not the extinction of light, but the widening of its beam. Jung once said, "The gods have become diseases." He meant that the archetypes, the cosmic patterns of meaning, no longer speak through myth, so they erupt through psychology. But perhaps the reverse is also true. The discoveries of physics are new myths through which the old gods return. Quantum entanglement, the observer effect, the unbroken field, these are not dry equations. They are metaphors of soul at the scale of the universe. The unity that Jung called UNUS MUNDUS may not be a theory, but an experience, one glimpsed by mystics, poets, and scientists alike. In this one world, psyche and matter, soul and atom, light and meaning are not separate realms, but reflections of a single rhythm. Consciousness is the universe looking at itself, and the soul is that gaze made personal. But even if this grand synthesis were true, it still leaves one essential question. Why does the soul incarnate at all? If we are patterns in a cosmic consciousness, what purpose does individuality serve? What is the meaning of this brief interval we call life? Jung believed the answer lay not in abstraction, but in meaning, in how the soul experiences itself through time. He saw every life as an experiment of the self, each struggle and joy as material for consciousness to know itself more deeply. And so, to complete this reflection, we must descend again from the stars to the human heart to ask what the soul means for us today. After all, we have explored the psyche's depth, the field of physics, the threshold of death. We return at last to the question that lives closest to home. What does the soul mean today? What can it possibly signify in a world of algorithms, data streams, and neural scans? Jung warned us that modern humanity had lost its soul not by denying God, but by losing depth. People are proud of their reason, he wrote, but reason alone does not nourish the spirit. He saw everywhere the symptoms of a one-dimensional existence. Anxiety, meaninglessness, compulsive activity. To him, these were not random ailments, but psychic reactions to the absence of the soul, the forgotten relationship with the inner world. He wrote, "The gods have become diseases. Zeus no longer rules Olympus but the solar plexus, and produces curious specimens for the doctor's consulting room." By this, he meant that what we once expressed as myth now erupts as symptom. The repressed gods return as neuroses, addictions, obsessions. The soul does not vanish. When ignored, it acts out. The soul, Jung said, is that part of us that seeks meaning rather than success, wholeness rather than perfection. It is the voice that whispers through depression, something is missing. It is the restlessness behind creativity, the ache beneath every love, the pull of the unknown that reason cannot silence. When we suffer, Jung believed, the soul is asking to be heard. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, he wrote. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. To live with soul, therefore, is to live symbolically, to see events not only as facts but as messages. When you fall ill, when a relationship ends, when coincidence pierces your routine, the soul is speaking through circumstance. Jung called this the symbolic life, and he lamented that modern civilization had lost it. The symbolic life, he said, is the real life. Everything else is but its preparation. Yet Jung was not nostalgic. He did not wish to return to the superstitions of the past. The task of the modern era, he believed, is to rediscover the soul consciously, without abandoning reason. Science gave us the outer world. Now, psychology must give us the inner. The two together form the new religion, not of belief, but of experience. The individual, he said, is the carrier of the divine. In that sense, the soul is not an escape from modern life, but its redemption. When we treat the psyche as mere brain chemistry, we exile meaning. When we restore the soul, we restore relationship to nature, to one another, to the invisible whole. Jung wrote near the end of his life, "Man needs the connection with the symbols of the unconscious. He must be in harmony with the forces which move his world." Think of how this applies now. Our technologies expand outward, but our spirits contract inward. We can measure galaxies, yet we cannot bear our own emptiness. The internet connects minds, but fragments meaning. The soul, once mirrored in myth and ritual, now wanders homeless through screens and markets. We speak of mental health, but rarely of spiritual depth. Jung would have seen this as the modern form of possession, the ego inflated by intellect, cut off from the self. To heal this divide, Jung did not propose doctrine but dialogue. He said each of us carries within us another who we do not know. He speaks to us in dreams and tells us how differently he sees us. That other one, the unknown partner within, is the soul. To speak with it is the beginning of individuation, the slow birth of authenticity. In practical terms, this means learning to listen again, to dreams, to art, to silence. It means seeing coincidence not as random but as invitation. It means treating life as a conversation with something greater. The modern world will not change until the individuals within it begin to live symbolically again, to see their struggles as chapters in the soul's unfolding. When Jung was asked what he thought the future of humanity depended on, he answered simply, on whether we can learn to relate to the soul. For him, that was the true moral question. Outer civilization follows inner civilization. A world without soul produces machines without mercy. Yet he never despaired. The soul, he said, is older than time. It will not be destroyed. And perhaps that is our hope, that no matter how mechanical life becomes, the human heart still dreams. It still longs for meaning, for mystery, for reunion with what it cannot name. So when we ask, do we have souls, the answer may not come from philosophy or physics, but from the quiet persistence of longing itself. The fact that we still ask the question is the proof that the soul endures. The question is its own evidence. And now, at the end of this long inquiry, one final reflection remains to gather the threads into a single vision, to return where we began, and ask not whether we have souls, but whether the soul has us. That final turning, the conclusion of the journey, is what comes next. We began with the question older than philosophy, do we have souls? Now, after following that question through Jung's psychology, through the equations of physics, through the memories of those who have touched death, perhaps we must reverse it. Perhaps the question has been wrong all along. Perhaps it is not we who have souls, but the soul that has us, that thinks and suffers and awakens through us, using our brief lives as instruments of its own unfolding. Jung once wrote, "The fact that the psyche produces fantasies that reach far beyond the individual proves that it is not limited to the personal, but is rooted in the collective unconscious, the objective psyche." In that insight lies the quiet revolution of his life, that we are not isolated egos moving through a meaningless universe, but expressions of a vast living order trying to know itself. What we call my life may be a single thread in that cosmic tapestry. Every joy, every wound, every coincidence is part of the soul's long experiment in awareness. Jung said, life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. If there is meaning in our suffering, it is not because it is fair or logical, but because it deepens the soul's capacity to see. The darkness we face is the raw material of consciousness. From this perspective, even death changes its face. It ceases to be the end of a story and becomes a turning of the page. The field of being, which physics glimpses as quantum unity and mystics feel as light, is the same field in which the soul moves an invisible continuum of consciousness. To die, Jung might say, is to awaken from the dream of separateness. To live is to dream it vividly. And so, the experiment of being continues. Each of us is a temporary aperture through which the one becomes many, so that it may recognize itself in infinite forms. To live consciously, then, is to cooperate with this unfolding to become, in Jung's phrase, a co-creator of the world. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That is the soul's only demand." The modern mind may call this poetry, but perhaps poetry is the oldest language of truth. Science gives us measurement. The soul gives us meaning. Between them lies the human experiment, fragile, fleeting, yet radiant with possibility. If Jung were with us now, he might not ask you to believe anything. He would ask you to observe, to notice how the world reflects your inner life, how dreams comment on your days, how synchronicity stitches coincidence into revelation. He would tell you that the soul speaks in symbols, not syllogisms, and that the greatest act of intelligence is to learn its grammar. And perhaps, as you listen, you will sense that this entire journey, the birth, the longing, the science, the silence, was never about proof, but about relationship. The soul is not a doctrine, it is a dialogue. To live with soul is to remember that meaning is not made, but revealed. That every experience, however small, is part of a conversation between the visible and the invisible. So, we end where we began, with the ember that refuses to die. The question remains, glowing softly, do we have souls? Perhaps the truer answer is a whisper from the depths. No, the soul has you. And in that realization, life itself becomes sacred again, not because it lasts forever, but because it means forever.